Welcome back. If you have been watching this whole time, I very much appreciate you. And I know we've had a few new subscribers, so I'm glad to have you joining us. And I just want to thank especially those who've come over from my cousin Pixie. She gave me a shout out very generously on her YouTube channel. So if you want to watch a mommy rocker chick vlogger speak her authentic truth, she has a lot of great perspectives and a lot of truth to share. I really appreciate her giving me that shout out. So I will put her YouTube channel below. You can check that out. She's been doing a lot of really interesting things about pop culture, which I'm really bad at that stuff. So maybe you can get a good mix of authenticity from both sides of the spectrum between the two of us. Today I wanted to come on here and go over something that I think is going to be pretty foundational for this channel. I wanted to just build on this foundation of what are vulnerabilities and resiliencies, and what I call the 4 pillars of vulnerability. So let's just break into what am I talking about when I bring up vulnerability and resiliency. So when I go over this with people in sessions, I usually get the option of asking them how they define vulnerability. So today what I'm going to do is just give you some of the most common answers that I hear from people and then kind of give you the bottom line. So normally what I hear is trauma could happen if you're vulnerable. I could get hurt. I don't like these feelings. Feeling uncomfortable, feeling unsafe. These are things that people will say when they're giving their own definition of vulnerability. So my bottom line of vulnerability is that vulnerability is the potential to be open to an attack or a wound. If you're a human and you are watching this and you are not a machine or an inanimate object, then you have vulnerabilities. We all have the potential to be open to an attack or a wound. What's different from vulnerability is weakness. Weakness is the inability to cope with the wound or the attack. That's a really important distinguishing factor because a lot of people, not all people, but a lot of people feel like weakness and vulnerability are the same thing. So they're related in a way. They both have to do with that attack or that wound, but vulnerability is just the potential, and the weakness is how we're responding or not responding to that attack and wound. The other piece of this is resiliency. So when I'm talking about resiliency, what I'm really talking about is our innate ability to deal with or cope with what is happening. When we are born, we already are hardwired with some of these vulnerabilities and some of these resiliencies. And our environment enhances that, for better or worse. There's 3 contexts in which we can experience all of these different kinds of vulnerabilities and resiliencies. The socio-political context, which is the world around us. The relational context, which is the world between us and everyone and everything else. And our individual context, what's going on inside of us. At the bottom of all of this, what's holding up all these different contexts, our vulnerabilities, our resources, and resiliencies are what I refer to as the 4 pillars of vulnerability. So these are power, value, attachment and connection. That's just one. I'll explain that in a moment. And control. I like to think of these pillars that have large windows, and I'm going to break down each pillar. But I think what's important to understand is that as we break these down, I'm going to try to have you check in with what imagery is coming up, Are you feeling anything? Are you noticing times where you've had these feelings, maybe recently? And at the very least, I know that right now in the world, we can absolutely see this happening on many different contexts. Let's break down the first pillar, power. On the one side of this window, we have the vulnerability. So feeling powerless, feeling like people are trying to exert power over us. These are very uncomfortable feelings. Even when we're witnessing this for other people that we love or feel very compassionate towards. And just wanting you to check in what images are coming up with the sense of powerlessness, the sense of someone trying to exert power over you. And trying to move back into our resiliencies around this, what we find on the other side is empowerment. A lot of people, when I'm talking with them about this, they're like, oh, that sounds really great. I don't know what that looks like. Or we don't necessarily have examples. Look at, how do you feel empowered? Maybe just even how you want to feel. Even if you're not there, that's okay. But what does empowerment mean for you? And what resiliencies or resources, again, that ability to cope with or ability to tap into the strength and confidence in living life the way that feels authentic and real to you. And we can obviously spread that amongst others. We can hopefully try to empower others to do the same. But right now we're just focusing on our individual context. Going back for a moment to that vulnerability, when we're feeling stuck in that feeling of powerlessness, we can sometimes get sucked in further. And what I mean by this is we start to react to that powerlessness. Instead of becoming aware and moving ourselves back into that empowerment, or even just a neutral stance with this power, we react and we might start to have some survival patterns around this. So this might look like us exerting power over others. So for instance, in a work environment, let's say that your boss is exerting power over you and kind of making you do something that you're really not comfortable doing in your work environment. And instead of trying to move towards empowerment for yourself and figure out how to empower other people on your team or around you, you walk out of that meeting and you go over to your subordinate or your colleague and you start to use similar language and similar mannerisms and start to exert power over. This is very common. This is not here to judge you. We all do this. We all have examples of what we can look at. So just trying to take that moment to recognize, am I reacting to this idea that someone could have power over me, or when I'm feeling powerless, or even when I'm watching other people? How am I reacting to that? Now I want to move into the pillar of value. When we are feeling that vulnerability side, devalued, not appreciated, not seen, not heard, this is very uncomfortable. Check in with yourself. See what images, what feelings, what sensations start to arise when you think about those types of situations where you might feel devalued or might witness other people being devalued. And what's your reaction to that? If we're reacting to it from a survival standpoint, what might happen is, again, we might go further into that. We might start to devalue others. We start dehumanizing. We ignore people's voices. We refuse to hear or see them. We refuse to validate any part of their experience, when we are participating in devaluing. This is a very knowing statement. So, oh, you're going to devalue me? Step back, watch this. I'm going to devalue you. Or I'm going to devalue this that you like. That's us reacting to those experiences, those sensations, those feelings of feeling devalued or watching people be devalued. On the other side of this window, what we're trying to move towards in our resiliency is our ability to, first and foremost, create value within ourselves. If we have the confidence and the self-esteem and the self-assurance that regardless if someone is appreciating me, validating me, seeing or hearing me, I know my truth. I know my value. And for a lot of people, that's very hard. So that can be a work in progress. That can be something that you choose to work on. It doesn't necessarily come easy for a lot of people. But that's really the resource to try to tap into. What are the things that I can create around me or within me? And of course, it feels great when we get the external validation, when we find other people who value us. So if our boss is devaluing us, but our coworker is like, don't listen to him, he's a jerk, we'll figure this out. That feels a lot better. When we're able to connect with our own knowing and authenticity and understanding of ourselves, we create the value and look for the value around us. So just noticing what's popping up for you now. And where do you want to create more resources or more resiliency around value? Next, we're going to talk about connection and attachment. This one's a little bit more in depth. So connection is what we're doing. Attachment is how we do that. When we look at this window and we go to the vulnerability side of connection and attachment, what we're recognizing are our patterns around disconnection, detachment, and that can be real or perceived. Threat of disconnection can be our anxiety of what could happen in the future. It doesn't have to be something that someone has already said. Unsafe patterns, inconsistencies, and instability. So these are the things that really create us to feel insecure or unsafe in our connections and our attachments. When we move to the other side and we're focusing on what helps us feel safe, connected, and securely attached, again, we're looking at what feels healthy for us, what feels consistent, what feels stable, what creates security for us in those connections and attachments. And this is a very complex, we are deeply ingrained and encoded with connection and attachment. And attachment is something that's starting within utero for us. So sometimes we have already come into the world with certain vulnerabilities or resiliencies around how we're attaching with our caregivers, with our environment. And so this is not a simple, easy, straightforward thing. And one of the things I would note is that for many people who have experienced trauma or adverse childhood experiences early on in life, or even later in life, but it's really traumatic or impactful for them, this can alter or crisscross messages in our brain around what is actually safe and what is unsafe. If we've only had certain types of experiences, we may not understand the true risks or threat of disconnection in other experiences. So there's a lot to unpack there, but just for our purposes today, really trying to sit with how are you reacting when there's that threat of disconnection and detachment, if it's inconsistent, unreliable, and how are you moving towards, or what helps you move towards feeling more secure attachment and connection. So then moving on to last, but certainly not least, our pillar of control. With the pillar of control, what we're really looking at is opening that window, and on the one side there is what makes us feel out of control, or that internal chaos, or what's actually just out of our control in general. So noticing the images and sensations that might be coming up with that. And then moving back towards what's in our control. What helps us organize that chaos. And I think this is the simplest one for me to maybe break down or explain to people, but I think it's the one that comes up the most for us, because the reality is we don't control a whole lot in our lives. And there's even moments we don't feel in control of ourselves. So it can be really the thing that gets us stuck the most. And how are we reacting to feeling out of control and that internal chaos? Typically, we go and we grasp for things that we want to control. We try to have control over others. We try and exert ourselves into situations and try and make that the situation we want it to be. Even if we have the best of intentions of like, hey, I just want to make this better for everyone. Here, let me just exert my control. But that's not always possible. And especially if we're working with, people or situations that have many layers and complexities to it, we very rarely get to just say, oh, this is what I'm going to do about this, and everybody's going to follow suit. When we try to move back towards what do we control, that might just be, I can take a big, long, deep breath for myself. I can refocus. I can pay attention to something else, distract myself, use my skills, call someone. When we're feeling those out of control feelings, when we're feeling that internal chaos, and when we're recognizing we don't have a whole lot of control in our lives, even things that we feel we can control, they're on a socio-political level. There's still a lot, I think we're learning that in the last year, that even my day-to-day things that I feel like I can control, when the world around us is making changes, such as the pandemic and COVID, around the world, we've really had to work with this sense of, what do I actually have control over? And how do I respond when I don't have control? Getting a lot of practice with that, whether we like it or not. I want to encourage you to work with, especially that side of when you're feeling powerless, devalued, detached and disconnected, and out of control. I don't care who you are. You are not your best self. It does not feel good to be in that place. And how are you reacting to any one of those or all of that? What does that look like for you? And remembering that there's a pathway back. There's a fluidity that we can find even in those moments. even if we're just finding ourselves back to a neutral, we're not making it better, we're not tapping into our resiliency, we're just not making it worse. We're not contributing to more of that vulnerability. Before we sign off, I just want to consolidate with, again, vulnerability is our ability or potential to be attacked or wounded. Weakness is the inability to deal with that attack or wound. Our resiliencies of being able to cope with that attack and wound and that impact. And that these are happening on 3 different contexts. What's going on within us, what's going on between us and the other people or situations we're interacting with, and what's going on in the world around us. And to try and work with this on a level of how are you reacting or responding to what's popping up, what causes you to feel those vulnerabilities, those pillars, and what are you recognizing for yourself in this moment as your resources and resiliencies to help deal with what's showing up. Once again, we've covered a lot of ground, and this will be something that I will continue to build upon. I look forward to any comments, questions, any way that this is showing up for you or you're connecting with this information. Please let me know if there's other topics or things that you're looking forward to hearing from me. I have a whole list of them, so just keep going, but I definitely want to know what you guys want to think about. I hope you take care of yourselves, and I will see you later.